Okay, let's unpack this. Imagine just walking through, say, San Salvador.
Right.
You might see people who look, well, incredibly different from each other. Someone with that deep bronze skin, straight black hair,
Hmm.
then maybe someone else with hazel eyes, a lighter complexion, even features you'd associate more with Europe.
It's quite striking.
It really is. For a country just over, 6.3 million people, it's remarkably varied. And that striking human diversity is exactly what we're diving into today.
Yeah.
Our mission, kind of drawing from the sources we've looked at, is to explore this rich tapestry, history, ancestry, geography that shaped the faces of El Salvador, to understand, why they look so distinct.
And what's fascinating, I think, is that this isn't just something you or I might notice wandering around. Researchers actually point to El Salvador as a prime example of human appearance being deeply shaped by these historical and geographical roots.
Oh,
It really challenges those sometimes monolithic assumptions we might have about what Central American looks like.
absolutely. And to really get that, we need to rewind, like, way back, before the Spanish showed up in the 16th century.
Right, pre-colonial times.
Yeah, the land we now call El Salvador, it was home to thriving indigenous groups. Primarily the Pupil people. They were descendants of the Nahua from central Mexico, and some smaller Maya groups, too.
These are the original inhabitants.
Exactly, laying down that very first layer, the foundation, genetically and culturally.
And these indigenous foundations, they're really the bedrock, you could say, of El Salvador's genetic tapestry.
Yeah,
If you try to picture these early people, they had those classic Mesoamerican features, right?
right, copper brown skin.
Yeah, copper brown skin, often with these rich undertones, straight black hair, usually quite coarse and strong, and generally a medium to short kind of stature. That was the baseline, the original genetic signature that everything else would interact with.
Right, the starting point. Then, boom, 16th century, the Spanish colonizers arrive, and they bring a whole new genetic blueprint. Genes for lighter skin, maybe narrower noses, taller builds on average, and a much wider range of eye colors, blues, greens, grays.
A completely different input, yeah.
And as we see across Latin America, centuries of intermarriage followed, mostly Spanish men and indigenous women. This quickly created a really powerful new demographic, the mestizo population.
And this mixing of gene pools, it created something pretty unique. So today, something like 86% of Salvadorans identify as mestizo.
Wow, 86%.
Yeah, which makes it one of the most uniformly mixed societies in Latin America in a way.
What do you mean by uniformly mixed?
Well, instead of having lots of distinct separate groups living side by side, you have a vast majority sharing a sort of similar ancestral blend, indigenous and European.
Okay, I see.
But, and this is key, that varied blend also produced really striking internal variety. So you'll find people whose features lean heavily indigenous, others who look mostly European, and tons of people who visibly carry traits of both, often in really unexpected combinations.
And we can't forget, even though the indigenous and European influences are, huge, there's another thread in there. Smaller, maybe, but still important.
The African echoes.
Exactly. Descendants of enslaved Africans brought during the colonial era, plus later Afro-Caribbean migrants. They added deeper skin tones, different hair textures like tighter curls, other distinct features.
Precisely. And, statistically, they're less than 1% of the population today.
Less than 1%. Wow.
Yeah, but their genetic and cultural imprint is, well, it's undeniably important, especially in certain coastal areas. They've woven this subtle but distinct thread into the Salvadoran identity.
Influencing things beyond just appearance, I bet.
Oh, absolutely. Everything from, say, certain food traditions like using plantains and coconut milk in some regional dishes to musical rhythms, and definitely adding to that incredible mosaic of physical features we see. It just highlights how complex national identity can be, even with smaller contributing groups.
Okay, so we've got these historical layers: indigenous, Spanish, African. Let's bring it forward. How does this ancestry actually look today? Starting with maybe the most obvious thing, skin tone.
Right.
You mentioned most Salvadorans fall along a spectrum tied to that indigenous European balance. Medium brown to lighter tan, generally.
That's right. And you can actually see geographical differences. If you were to go to some rural indigenous communities, places like Izalco or Panchamalco,
Okay.
you'd probably see darker, almost bronze tones being more common. But then, moving to the cities, especially San Salvador, and lighter skin tends to be more prevalent.
Yeah.
It directly reflects a greater European admixture, basically, a stronger presence of European genes in those urban populations.
Right, that makes sense. But here's something fascinating you mentioned from the sources.
The disconnect.
Yeah. Only about 1% identify as indigenous today, but genetically, it's over 85% carrying significant indigenous markers.
Exactly. It's a huge gap.
That's really something. And this is where it gets maybe a bit uncomfortable. Sociological surveys suggest lighter skin has historically meant higher social status.
Unfortunately, yes.
Lighter-skinned Salvadorans may be more likely to be in the media, elite positions, while darker-skinned Salvadorans have faced discrimination. That link between appearance and social standing is, well, it's there.
It absolutely is.
Yeah.
And that gap between self-ID and genetic ancestry, it's not just a number. It really reflects historical power dynamics. For generations, there were pressures, sometimes subtle, sometimes not, to distance oneself from indigenous identity.
For social mobility,
Yes.
or even safety.
Both, potentially.
Yeah.
It shows how powerfully social ideas can reshape how people see themselves, even obscuring a genetic reality that's far more indigenous than many might outwardly claim. It's a really powerful lesson in identity being both inherited and constructed.
Wow. Okay, moving beyond skin tone, let's talk eye color. You mentioned surprises there.
Yeah.
Most people, maybe 85–90%, have dark brown eyes, right? Typical for indigenous and mixed heritage.
Correct. That's the majority. But then you have that European influence making itself known.
How so?
Roughly 10 to 12% of Salvadorans actually have hazel, green, or even blue eyes.
10 to 12%, that seems quite high.
It is noticeable.
Yeah.
It's most common in families with stronger Spanish roots, maybe from later arrivals or specific regions, but it's not rare to meet someone who has, say, warm olive skin, straight black hair, classic mestizo features, but then, bam, these striking green or hazel eyes. It's just a beautiful, visible reminder of that centuries-long mixing, that admixture. And it definitely challenges outsider assumptions about what Central Americans should look like.
Yeah.
A living testament to the blend.
Okay, next up. Height and build. That tells a story too, doesn't it?
For sure.
The average Salvadoran man, about 5'5", woman and 5'1". That puts El Salvador among the countries with shorter average stature in the Americas.
It does. And that average largely reflects the strong indigenous genetic influence. But, and this is critical, you can't separate that from environmental factors.
Like nutrition.
It's exactly. Nutrition, socioeconomic inequality, they play a huge role. If you look closely, you'll see differences. Indigenous communities often show more compact, stocky builds, maybe historically adapted for agriculture or mountain life.
Okay.
Whereas those with more European ancestry or, frankly, better access to resources growing up often display taller, leaner frames.
So better nutrition, healthcare, it literally changes body shape over generations.
Studies strongly suggest that yes, access to good food and healthcare in childhood is linked to taller stature and leaner builds. It shows how inequality can be physically inscribed on a population.
Which leads to the future, right? You mentioned a trend.
Yeah, researchers are noticing that younger Salvadorans are, on average, getting taller.
Oh, interesting.
It's likely due to improvements in childhood nutrition and healthcare over recent decades. It's a slow shift, but it shows how even these deep-rooted physical traits can evolve as conditions change.
That's a positive sign.
It is. It's an indicator of progress, subtly changing the physical landscape. And alongside height, you see that incredible range in hair texture and facial features.
Oh, yeah, the variety there is huge. Indigenous ancestry brings that signature straight, often coarse, black hair, very thick usually.
Right.
But in mestizo populations, it often softens up, maybe waves, lighter brown shades appearing.
Exactly. And then a small minority, stronger European roots, might even have light brown or blonde hair. It just adds another layer to that whole spectrum.
And the facial features echo this diversity.
Beautifully. Indigenous descendants often have, say, broader faces, those distinct almond-shaped eyes, high cheekbones, maybe a more rounded structure overall.
Okay.
Then the European admixture often brings in narrower noses, maybe thinner lips, sharper jawlines. And again, Afro-Salvadoran ancestry adds more variety, fuller lips, maybe different hair textures like tighter curls. All these blended features just make it really hard, maybe impossible, to pin down one single typical Salvadoran look.
The beauty's in the mix.
Totally. The beauty's in the combination.
Yeah. It's still amazing how strong that indigenous legacy is, though, even with only 1% identifying that way.
But over 85% carrying the genes.
Yeah. That genetic imprint is powerful. It says so much about the country's foundation.
It really is. And what's encouraging, according to the sources, are these cultural revival efforts happening now.
Like with the language.
Exactly. The Pupo language, Nahuatl. It nearly vanished, after decades of suppression, especially during certain political periods.
Right.
But now there's a resurgence. Language schools, community programs, they're bringing it back.
Yeah.
And with that comes this this needed recognition that indigenous faces, indigenous features, they're absolutely central to El Salvador's story, not something to be pushed aside.
So given all this layering, all this mixing over centuries, is it even fair to ask if there's a typical Salvadoran look? Does that whole idea just kind of crumble?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's where the debate really lies. On one side, you could argue, well, statistically, looking at the dominant mestizo group, maybe there's a common image.
Yeah.
Medium height, tan skin, dark eyes, straight black hair. That's sort of the average, maybe. But
What?
the strong counter is that the country is built on such profound, varied mixing that no single look can possibly capture the essence. Insisting on one look erases the richness.
And how does this play out internationally, like in the U.S. with the large Salvadoran community there?
That's a really interesting dimension. In the U.S., where you have, what, over 2.5 million Salvadorans,
Yeah, huge diaspora.
they often get lumped into this generic Latino or Hispanic category, which can, unintentionally perhaps, erase their specific national identity, their unique history.
Right.
And Salvadorans themselves often push back. They'll say, look, our diversity, indigenous, mestizo, Afro-descended, European, that's what makes us distinct. Our identity isn't monolithic. It's in the variety. It's a powerful claim.
Identity through difference. I like that.
And it's not a finished story, right? This diversity is still evolving. Migration is huge.
Communities abroad mixing with other groups.
Exactly. Creating new generations with even wider genetic influences. And then return migration brings those influences, new genes, new cultural bits, back into El Salvador. It keeps layering.
So what do the experts, the geneticists, predict for the future? More mixing.
Basically, yes. They think future Salvadorans will still be primarily mestizo in identity, but with even more variation because of this global intermarriage.
But at the same time, maybe more recognition of the distinct parts.
That's the hope. Those efforts to preserve indigenous languages, traditions, they might bring distinct features that were maybe downplayed for a long time back into the spotlight, creating a richer, more acknowledged spectrum. It's a really dynamic process.
It sounds like it.
And, to really picture it, imagine getting on a bus in downtown San Salvador. You might see a student, caramel skin, striking hazel eyes, sitting next to a man with deep bronze skin, straight black hair. Across the aisle, maybe a woman with a lighter complexion, wavy brown hair, chatting with a vendor. They all look different. Each carries their own ancestry.
But all Salvador.
Exactly. Same flag, same anthem, same identity. Or picture an indigenous ceremony out in Izalco. Elders with those deep-set eyes, copper skin, leading rituals, while younger mestizo families from the city watch, curious.
Yeah.
That constant mingling of faces, traditions. That's El Salvador's complexity. And its beauty, I think.
So this whole deep dive, it really shows El Salvador's diversity isn't just a footnote. It is the story. Enduring indigenous roots, the huge impact of Spanish colonization, those African echoes, modern migration, it's all written right there on people's faces.
Which leads us to maybe ask ourselves, when we meet someone from El Salvador, or really any place with such a rich, mixed history, are we actually seeing them in all their blended reality? Or are we maybe filtering them through our own ideas, our preconceived notions of what they should look like based on some simplified category we have in our heads?
That's a really important question to ask. So next time you think of El Salvador, don't picture just one face.
No.
Imagine a whole nation of faces, each unique, each carrying its own story, its own ancestry, but all tied to the same land. Because as we've seen today in El Salvador, diversity itself really is identity.